The transmission arrived 14 minutes before we dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and it nearly killed my career before the humans ever got the chance. I was sitting at my station aboard the throne of Ashavar, flagship of the Draven Imperial Conquest Fleet, running final threat projections on the target world. 200 warships stretched behind us in attack formation, carrying enough firepower to crack a planet down to its mantle. We had done it before. 900 worlds bore the scars of Draven superiority, and today, we were supposed to add one more. My name is Valeth Soren. I held the rank of Tactical Liaison Officer, which is a polite way of saying I was the person who compiled intelligence reports that nobody wanted to read. My job was to gather every scrap of information about a target civilization and present it to the fleet commander so he could make informed decisions. In 3 years aboard the flagship, Grand Tactician Orath Mail had never once read my full reports. He skimmed the summary page, asked if the target had energy shields, and when I said no, he stopped listening. The target was a small blue world orbiting a yellow star at the edge of an unremarkable spiral arm. The locals called it Earth. Our long-range surveys classified it as a pre-threshold civilization, meaning they had not developed faster-than-light travel, had no energy shielding technology, and maintained no detectable orbital defense network. Their largest vessels were chemical fuel rockets that could barely reach their own neighboring planets. By every measurable standard, Earth was a soft target, a world ripe for conquest, rich in water and minerals, populated by a species that had not yet earned a seat at the galactic table. The transmission changed nothing about that assessment, not officially, but it changed something in me that I could not name at the time. It arrived as plain text on an unencrypted frequency. No diplomatic seals, no formal identification headers, no species registry codes. Just 7 words in flawless Draven script, as though someone on that little blue planet had sat down and typed it out the way you might leave a note for a neighbor. Turn around. This is your only courtesy. The communications officer flagged it and routed it to the command deck. I watched Grand Tactician Mail read it from his command throne, his 4 eyes narrowing in sequence the way they always did when something amused him. He read it aloud to the bridge crew, and laughter filled the room like pressure venting from a ruptured seal. "They have spirit," Mail said, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. "I always enjoy spirit. It makes the surrender that much sweeter." He ordered the transmission broadcast fleet-wide, and within minutes, I could hear soldiers in the corridors repeating it to each other like a joke. "Turn around. This is your only courtesy." The punchline of a species that did not yet understand its place in the galaxy. I did not laugh. I went back to my station and opened the intelligence file on Earth for the 11th time. Here is what troubled me. We had compiled our data from 3 sources. The first was a long-range orbital survey conducted by an unmanned probe 6 years prior. Standard readings: atmospheric composition, population density, electromagnetic emissions, technological indicators. Everything consistent with a pre-threshold classification. The second source was the Imperial Stellar Cartography Database, which listed the Sol system as unclaimed, unexploited, and unremarkable. The third source was a set of second-hand accounts from independent traders who had passed through the region. It was the third source that I kept returning to. There were 4 accounts total. The first came from a Velesi merchant captain who had dropped into the Sol system to refuel from the outer gas giant. His log entry was brief and professional, noting the presence of a habitable world in the inner system, with primitive radio emissions. He departed without incident, unremarkable. But his crew manifest showed something odd. Of the 14 crew members who entered the Sol system, only 9 continued on the next voyage. The other 5 resigned upon reaching the next port. No reasons given, no complaints filed. They simply stopped flying. The second account came from a Thessari survey team contracted by a mining consortium to assess the system's asteroid belt. Their report was thorough, detailed, and entirely normal, except for one paragraph near the end that had been redacted. Not by our intelligence services, by their own government. A Thessari crew had voluntarily censored their own findings about the Sol system, and no record existed of what they had removed. The third account was from an independent courier who made a navigational error and passed within scanning range of Earth. His entire report consisted of a single line entered into his personal log. They are not what the scanners say they are. The fourth account was not an account at all. It was an absence. A Korvathi exploration vessel entered the Sol system 11 years ago. It never filed a report. It never returned to Korvathi space. It was listed as lost to unknown causes, and the Korvathi had quietly reclassified the Sol system as a navigational hazard without explanation. I had flagged all of this in my intelligence summary. I had recommended a cautious approach, perhaps a preliminary reconnaissance mission, before committing the full fleet. Grand Tactician Mail had glanced at my recommendation and told me that caution was the language of cowards, and that the Draven Empire did not speak it. Now I sat at my station, staring at the transmission, and I could not shake the feeling that I was missing something fundamental, not about the content of the warning, about its timing. We were still in faster-than-light transit when the message arrived. Our fleet was traveling through compressed space, invisible to conventional sensors, undetectable by any known technology, short of the most advanced military-grade interdiction arrays. No pre-threshold civilization should have been able to see us coming. They should not have known we existed until we materialized in their sky. Yet the warning arrived 14 minutes before we dropped out. 14 minutes. As though someone on that little blue world had looked up at an empty sky and known exactly when and where 200 warships would appear. I brought this to the attention of the navigation officer, a sharp-minded woman named Lieutenant Tessara Colm. She ran the calculations 3 times and confirmed what I suspected. The transmission had originated from Earth's surface, at a time when our fleet was still 17 light-years away, traveling at speeds that should have made us invisible to any detection system in the known galaxy. Could they have spotted our departure from Draven space? I asked. Tessara shook her head. Our departure point was shielded. Even if they had faster-than-light sensors, which they do not, they would have needed to know exactly where to look, and exactly when to look there. This was not detection, Valeth. This was prediction. I thanked her, and returned to my station. I did not report this finding to Mail. I already knew what he would say. He would tell me that the timing was a coincidence, that some automated system had been broadcasting the warning on a loop, that it meant nothing, and perhaps he would be right. But coincidences did not speak fluent Draven. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, and for the first time, I saw Earth with my own eyes on the viewport screen. It was beautiful. A sphere of blue and white and green, hanging in the darkness like something precious and fragile. I had seen hundreds of worlds from orbit. Most of them looked dead or dying, or simply indifferent to their own existence. Earth looked alive in a way that made my chest tighten. 200 warships arranged themselves in standard approach formation. Weapon systems came online, with a hum that I could feel through the deck plates. Targeting arrays locked onto the planet below. Everything proceeded exactly as it had 900 times before. Then the second transmission arrived. Every ship received it simultaneously, not sequentially, not cascading through the fleet's communication relays the way a normal broadcast would. Every single vessel, from the flagship to the smallest escort frigate, received the same message at the same instant, delivered directly to their primary communication arrays, as though someone had reached inside each ship and placed the words there by hand. The message was in Draven again. Not the formal, slightly archaic dialect of our diplomatic channels, the modern conversational dialect spoken in the lower decks of warships, the language of soldiers. Warning acknowledged, you chose this. Then silence. Every channel went quiet, not just the human transmissions. Everything. The ambient radio chatter from Earth's surface, the electromagnetic hum of their satellites, the faint background noise of a living civilization, all of it stopped at once, as though someone had pressed a switch and turned an entire planet mute. And then my passive sensors registered something that made the blood drain from my face. A contact, massive, directly ahead of the fleet, positioned between us and Earth. It appeared on my screen for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for me to register its size. It was larger than our flagship, larger than any vessel I had ever seen or heard of. Its energy signature alone exceeded the combined output of our entire fleet. And then it vanished, not moving away, not cloaking, just ceasing to exist on my sensors as though it had never been there at all. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. Across the bridge, Grand Tactician Male leaned forward in his command throne and smiled the smile of a conqueror who sees nothing but glory ahead. "Begin the invasion," he said. I closed my eyes and wished, for the first time in my military career, that someone above me had bothered to read my report. 11 hours passed, and nothing happened. I want to be precise about that because the nothing was important. It was not the nothing of an empty room or a quiet night. It was the nothing of a held breath, the nothing of a predator lying perfectly still in tall grass, the nothing that exists in the half-second between a trigger being pulled and the bullet finding its mark. The fleet moved into high orbit around Earth. Standard procedure. We had done this so many times that every officer on the bridge could have performed their duties in their sleep. Scanner teams mapped the surface. Communication officers monitored frequencies. Weapons crews ran targeting solutions. Everything functioned exactly as designed. And Earth sat below us like a sleeping animal, showing us nothing but blue oceans and white clouds, and the faint glitter of city lights on the dark side. I ran continuous sensor sweeps from my station, cycling through every frequency band our equipment could access. Population confirmed at approximately 8 billion individuals. Dense urban centers spread across every major landmass. Atmospheric craft visible in large numbers. Orbital infrastructure consisting of approximately 9,000 satellites in various orbits. Most of them small. Most of them consistent with basic communication and observation technology. Surface military installations detected in expected locations. Ground vehicles, naval vessels, fixed-wing aircraft. All of it exactly what you would expect from a species that had mastered industrial technology, but not yet taken the leap to interstellar capability. No energy shields. No orbital defense platforms. No fleet. Nothing that should have worried a single officer aboard any of our 200 ships. And yet the silence ate at me like acid. I could feel it in the corridors when I walked to the mess hall for a ration break. I could see it in the way the crew moved. A little too quickly, a little too quietly, as though some animal part of their brains was screaming at them to pay attention to something their conscious minds could not identify. The ship hummed and functioned and operated at peak efficiency, and beneath all of that normalcy there was a wrongness that I could taste in the recycled air. Grand Tactician Male stood on the command deck and issued orders with the comfortable authority of a man who had never been wrong about anything that mattered. He ordered the first phase of standard pre-invasion protocol. Deploy scanner drones to map military installations in detail. Jam local communications to prevent coordinated resistance. Establish orbital superiority, and begin identifying landing zones. The communications jamming failed first. Our electronic warfare systems were the most advanced in the Empire, capable of drowning out the transmissions of civilizations far more sophisticated than Earth. We activated them. For approximately 30 seconds, Earth's airwaves went silent. Then the human transmissions resumed, at exactly the same strength, on exactly the same frequencies, as though our jamming systems did not exist. The electronic warfare officer tried 3 more times with increasing power, each attempt drawing more energy from the ship's main reactor. Each time, the human signals punched through, as if there were nothing in the way. On the 4th attempt, something punched back. A burst of static so powerful that it overloaded 2 relay boards and sent sparks showering across the EW officer's console. The EW officer reported the failure to the bridge. Male frowned and told him to keep trying. I noted the failure in my log and felt the cold knot in my stomach tighten by another degree. Then the drones launched. 140 scanner drones, each one a hardened reconnaissance platform the size of a small shuttle, equipped with active and passive sensor arrays, communication relays, and rudimentary evasive maneuvering capability. They dropped from the fleet in a coordinated wave and descended toward Earth's atmosphere. I watched them on my tracking display, 140 green dots falling toward the blue curve of the planet. They entered the upper atmosphere and began transmitting telemetry. Atmospheric density, temperature gradients, wind patterns, electromagnetic field strength, standard data, routine. 90 seconds after atmospheric entry, the first drone disappeared from my display. Not destroyed. There was no impact signature, no detonation, No debris field. The green dot simply ceased to exist. Then another. Then 3 more. Then 12 at once. They disappeared in clusters, almost rhythmically, as though something in the atmosphere was swallowing them at a steady pace. In under 2 minutes, every single drone was gone. I stared at my display. The tracking screen showed nothing but the curve of the planet and empty space where 140 military-grade reconnaissance platforms had been moments before. No wreckage, no energy readings, no explanation. The bridge went quiet. Officers exchanged glances. Someone coughed nervously. I noticed that the communications officer's hands were trembling the same way mine had been hours earlier. Mail's mandibles tightened. He ordered a second wave. Hardened military drones this time. Heavier armor, full countermeasure suites, electronic decoy packages, 60 units, deployed in staggered formation, with intervals designed to allow survivor drones to transmit data about whatever had destroyed the first wave. They launched. They entered the atmosphere. They lasted 1 minute and 43 seconds. Same result: no destruction, no debris, no energy signatures. They simply stopped existing, as though someone had reached up and erased them from reality with a cloth. I pulled up every sensor log from both drone waves and began searching for anomalies. I cross-referenced electromagnetic data, gravitational readings, thermal signatures, even the faint residual traces of quantum field distortion that our most sensitive instruments could detect. I found nothing in the expected places: no weapons fire, no shield interactions, no atmospheric phenomena that could explain the losses. But I found something else, buried deep in the ambient radiation data that the fleet's passive sensors collected continuously. The satellites. Earth's 9,000 orbital satellites. I had flagged them in my initial assessment as standard communication and observation platforms. But now, examining the power output data more carefully, I saw something that did not fit. Their energy signatures were fluctuating in patterns that were completely inconsistent with communication hardware. Some of them were running power cycles that matched the profile of military-grade targeting arrays, not the primitive targeting systems you would expect from a pre-threshold species. Advanced arrays, the kind used by civilizations 2 or 3 tiers above Earth's supposed technological level. And the power levels. Each individual satellite was drawing energy that exceeded what should have been possible for an object of its size by a factor of several hundred. Where was the energy coming from? They had no visible power plants, no fusion reactors, no antimatter containment. They looked like tin cans with solar panels, but they were operating at outputs that would have strained the reactor of a Draven battlecruiser. I ran the calculations 4 times. The numbers did not change. Something was powering those satellites from a source my instruments could not detect, and whatever that source was, it was enormous. I compiled this data and tried to flag it for the bridge crew. Before I could transmit my report, the internal communications system on the flagship did something impossible. The first reports came from the lower decks. Soldiers in the barracks and mess halls began hearing voices on their personal communication devices. Whispered voices, quiet and intimate, like someone leaning close to your ear in a dark room. The voices were speaking Draven, not the general language of official channels, specific dialects, regional accents, the particular inflections of individual homeworlds. And they were saying names, individual names, the personal names of the soldiers who held those devices. A weapons technician named Korev Shan reported that his communicator whispered his childhood nickname, a name known only to his family, on a colony world 16 light-years from Earth. A navigation cadet said her device recited the name of her home village, a settlement of fewer than 300 people, on a minor agricultural world. A security officer heard a lullaby that his mother had sung to him as a child, rendered in his mother's voice with perfect fidelity. An engine room supervisor heard his own voice speaking back to him, repeating a private conversation he had recorded for his daughter before departure. A conversation stored in encrypted personal files on his own device, behind 3 layers of military-grade security. Engineering insisted it was signal contamination from Earth's surface transmissions, bleeding into our communication systems through some unusual atmospheric phenomenon. I knew that was impossible. Earth should not have known our language. Earth should not have known our names. Earth should not have known the encrypted contents of personal devices aboard warships that had never visited this system before. The mood on the ship changed. I could feel it in the corridors, in the way soldiers moved and spoke, and failed to meet each other's eyes. We had conquered 900 worlds. We had faced down civilizations with armies and fleets and weapons of genuine power. But this was different. This was not an enemy standing in front of us with a weapon raised. This was something reaching into our ship, into our devices, into our most private and protected memories, and whispering to let us know it was there. It was not a threat, it was a demonstration. A quiet, intimate demonstration that said, "We are already inside your walls." Grand Tactician Male, to his credit, did not show fear. Whether he felt it, I cannot say. What he showed was anger. Cold, controlled anger. The anger of a commander who has been embarrassed in front of his fleet and intends to correct the situation with overwhelming force. He ordered a targeted orbital strike, not a full bombardment, a demonstration of our own. A single concentrated blast aimed at an uninhabited desert region on one of Earth's larger continents. A message, delivered in the only language Male understood. We are here. We are powerful. Surrender or face destruction. 3 heavy cruisers moved into firing position, their massive hulls rotating with ponderous grace until their ventral batteries faced the planet below. Their primary weapons charged with a sound like a storm, building inside the hull of each ship, a deep, resonant hum that I could feel vibrating through the deck plates beneath my boots. Targeting solutions were calculated with precision that accounted for atmospheric refraction, planetary rotation, and the curvature of the beam path. Fire coordinates were confirmed and reconfirmed. The desert was empty. No civilian population, no military installations, no strategic value. This was pure theater, a show of force designed to remind the humans what they were dealing with. The command came. 3 cruisers fired simultaneously, 3 beams of concentrated energy, each one capable of turning a mountain into a crater, lanced down toward Earth's surface in columns of blinding white light. The beams hit the atmosphere and stopped. I leaned forward in my chair, certain my display was malfunctioning, but the visual feeds confirmed what the sensors showed. 3 beams of planet-killing energy had entered the upper atmosphere and simply halted. They hung there, suspended in the air like columns of frozen light, neither advancing nor dissipating, as though the atmosphere itself had reached out and caught them in its fist. For 3 seconds, they held, motionless, perfect, frozen in place by something that our science had no name for. Then they went out. Not reflected, not redirected. They were extinguished, the way you might pinch out a candle flame between 2 fingers, casually, almost gently, as though it required no effort at all. The bridge was silent. I heard nothing but the hum of the ship's reactor, and the sound of my own breathing, and the faint, distant whisper of a name that might have been mine, coming through a speaker that should have been inactive. Then, a new transmission arrived. Audio only. A single human voice, calm and unhurried, speaking Draven, with the easy fluency of a native speaker. That was your weapons test. Here is ours. A point of light appeared on the surface of Earth, small and brilliant, like a star had landed on the ground. It pulsed once, twice, and on the 3rd pulse, it released something into the sky. Not a beam, not a missile. Something my sensors could not classify, moving so fast that it registered as a momentary streak on my display before vanishing entirely. It rose from the surface in less than a second, crossed the distance between planet and fleet in less than a heartbeat, and struck one of the outer destroyers at the edge of our formation. The destroyer did not explode. Explosions I could have understood. Explosions were familiar. What happened to the Crimson Fang was not familiar. The ship cracked. That is the only word I can use. It cracked like an egg struck against a hard surface, splitting along its center line, with a sound that carried through the vacuum as a vibration in every hull in the fleet. Atmosphere vented in twin geysers of white vapor. Bodies tumbled into the void. Small, dark shapes spinning against the blue glow of the planet below. The 2 halves of the ship drifted apart, trailing fire and debris, and then went dark. No beam, no missile, no visible weapon of any kind. The ship simply broke apart, as though something invisible had reached out and snapped it in half with its bare hands. The fleet erupted. Alarms screamed on every deck, their wailing tones overlapping into a discordant wall of sound. Officers shouted contradictory orders. Ships broke formation, their captains acting on instinct rather than command, pulling away from the formation's edges, as though distance from the point of impact could protect them. On the flagship's command deck, Grand Tactician Mail gripped the arms of his throne and stared at the dying destroyer with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was not fear, not yet. It was the look of a man who has just realized that the rules he has spent his entire life mastering do not apply here, that the game he thought he was playing does not exist, and the real game has rules he has never been taught. I looked at the point of light on Earth's surface. It was still there, pulsing gently, waiting, patient. And I understood, with a clarity that felt like a blade sliding between my ribs, that the humans had not fired a weapon at us. They had shown us a weapon. There is a difference. When you fire a weapon, you are trying to destroy your enemy. When you show a weapon, you are giving them a chance to leave. We were not going to leave. Mail was already shouting orders, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. Regroup the formation. Charge all weapons. Prepare for full engagement. He did not understand, or perhaps he understood perfectly, and simply refused to accept it. In the Draven Empire, retreat was a death sentence. A grand tactician who returned home without a conquest did not face demotion. He faced execution. Mail's choices had narrowed to two: conquer Earth or die trying. I suspected Earth would be happy to accommodate the second option. I pulled bodies from the corridor for 40 minutes before the medical teams arrived. The shockwave from the Crimson Fang's destruction had propagated through the fleet's formation as a kinetic ripple, a pressure wave transmitted through the thin medium of debris and vented atmosphere that struck nearby vessels with enough force to buckle hull plates. On the throne of Ashavar, a sealed compartment in the mid-decks had ruptured. The bulkhead failed along a stress fracture that maintenance had flagged 6 months ago, and command had declined to repair. 14 crew members were in that compartment when it breached. I reached them before the damage control teams because my station was only 2 corridors away. A deep, percussive crack followed by the scream of metal bending in directions it was never meant to go. And beneath all of that, the sounds that people make when the air is being torn from their lungs. I saved 3 of them. 11 died in the corridor, while I pressed emergency sealant against wounds that went deeper than sealant could reach. A young sensor technician named Chorus Tal bled out while looking at my face. She was 19 years old. She had been aboard the flagship for less than 3 months. Her family lived on a farming colony in the Draven interior, and she had joined the fleet because the recruitment officer told her she would see the galaxy. She saw it. She saw the cold black void pouring through a ruptured hull, and then she saw nothing at all. I carried her body to the makeshift triage station that the medical staff had set up in the adjacent cargo bay, and then I went to the nearest washroom and stood over the basin until my hands stopped shaking. It took a long time. The face that looked back at me from the mirror was not the face of a soldier. It was the face of someone who was beginning to understand that everything he had been told about the way the galaxy worked was wrong. When I returned to my station, the tactical display told me a story that would have been unthinkable 12 hours earlier. Grand Tactician Mail had not retreated. He had not signaled for negotiation. He had not even paused. While I was pulling dead crew members from a shattered corridor, he had been reorganizing the fleet into a tighter formation and preparing for a full-scale planetary bombardment. Every ship, every weapon. A simultaneous strike designed to overwhelm whatever defense system had stopped our initial test firing. The logic, if you could call it that, was simple. 1 beam had been stopped. 3 beams had been stopped. 200 ships firing at once could not all be stopped. The defense system, whatever it was, had limits. It had to have limits. Nothing was infinite. If we hit it hard enough and fast enough, something would get through. That was the theory. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe it very badly, because the alternative was that we were about to do the stupidest thing any Draven fleet had ever done, and I was going to be on board when it happened. Before the bombardment order was finalized, I did something I should have done hours ago. I broke protocol. I left my station without authorization, descended 4 decks, walked through 3 security checkpoints using my intelligence clearance to bypass the guards, and found the office of Dreth Savan. Dreth was a xenoanthropologist. Civilian, old, gray-scaled and slow-moving, with the careful posture of an academic who had spent 50 years hunched over research terminals. He had been assigned to the fleet as part of the standard Conquest support package, the team of academics who cataloged conquered species, assessed their cultural artifacts for value, and determined which populations could be safely integrated into the Empire's labor force. He was good at his job in the way that quiet, methodical people are good at things. He noticed details. He followed threads. He did not jump to conclusions. And unlike every officer on the command deck, he had no personal investment in the outcome of this invasion. His career did not depend on victory. His life did not depend on conquest. He was free to see clearly, and what he had seen clearly had frightened him badly. I found him in his cramped office surrounded by screens displaying human broadcasts. His desk was covered in notes written in a cramped, precise hand. Empty ration containers were stacked in the corner, evidence that he had not left this room in many hours. He looked up when I entered, and the expression on his face told me that he had found something and was not sure he wanted to share it. "Tell me," I said. He took a breath. "You know that we have been intercepting their surface broadcasts since we entered the system." Standard procedure. Standard procedure, yes. We intercept, we catalog, we file. Nobody reads the files because nobody cares what a pre-threshold species talks about among themselves. But I read them, Valeth. I have been reading them since we arrived. I have been reading their news broadcasts, their scientific publications, their entertainment media, their military communications. He paused and looked at me over the top of his reading spectacles. Their military communications are not encrypted. I stared at him. What? They broadcast their military doctrine on open channels, training manuals, strategic frameworks, tactical analyses of hypothetical scenarios, weapons development timelines, force deployment philosophies, all of it available to anyone with a receiver pointed in the right direction. That is insane. That is what I thought. No civilization broadcasts its military capabilities openly unless it is either too stupid to know anyone is listening or too powerful to care who hears. I spent the last 6 hours determining which category the humans fall into. He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands, the gesture of a man who has seen something that he cannot unsee. I believe I have my answer. He turned one of his screens toward me. It displayed a list of references pulled from what he called the humans' public information networks. A vast interconnected data system that they made freely available to their entire population. Unclassified, unrestricted, accessible to anyone on the planet with a basic communication terminal. They call it the Internet, he said. Everything is on it. Their history, their wars, their weapons programs, their nuclear testing records, their chemical and biological research, their military procurement budgets, their satellite launch manifests, everything. Why would they make all of this available? Dreth looked at me with an expression that was equal parts admiration and dread. Because they want us to see it, all of it. Every civilization that has pointed a receiver at Earth for the last century has been able to read their military capabilities in detail. They are not hiding anything, Valeth. They are showing us exactly what they are. It is a warning in itself. They have been screaming into the void for 100 years, telling anyone who would listen exactly what they are capable of, and the galaxy has been too arrogant to pay attention. He pulled up another file. But that is not the part that concerns me. This is. The screen displayed a catalog of human fiction. Stories. Thousands of them, spread across multiple formats. Written narratives, visual productions, interactive simulations, all of them sharing a common theme. They write stories about alien invasions, Dreth said quietly. They have been writing them for over a century. Hundreds of stories, thousands of variations, covering every conceivable scenario. Orbital bombardment, ground assault, biological warfare, infiltration, technological subjugation, mind control, resource extraction, forced assimilation. Every method of conquest that any species in the galaxy has ever employed, The humans have imagined, analyzed, and written a story about how they would defeat it. He leaned forward. These are not vague fantasies, Valeth. These are detailed tactical narratives. Some of them include specific countermeasures, weapons systems, and strategic doctrines that are functionally indistinguishable from actual military planning documents. The humans have been wargaming alien invasions as a form of popular entertainment for generations. They have crowdsourced their defense strategy across billions of minds. Every possible attack vector has been anticipated, analyzed, and counterplanned by their civilian population, and then refined through iteration after iteration of storytelling. I sat down because my legs no longer felt reliable. You are telling me they have been preparing for us. I am telling you, they have been preparing for everyone, for decades, perhaps longer. He pulled up one more file, but there is something else, something worse. The screen showed a database entry from a galactic trade registry, a list of civilizations that had detected Earth's electromagnetic emissions over the past century. 17 entries. 17 civilizations had picked up Earth's signals, identified the planet as inhabited, assessed its technological level, and investigated further. Not one of them had invaded. I looked at the list. Some of them were minor powers with limited military capability. That explained their restraint. But others were significant. The Thessari Combine, the Korvathi Sovereignty, the Velesi Trade Federation, the Hurricane Dominion, powers with fleets and armies, and the proven willingness to use them. They had looked at Earth, a planet broadcasting its presence to the galaxy, with no visible defenses, and every single one of them had chosen to leave it alone. I searched for records of why they withdrew, Dreth said. Reports, intelligence assessments, diplomatic memoranda, anything that would explain why 17 civilizations looked at an apparently defenseless world and decided not to touch it. What did you find? Nothing. That is what I found. No reports, no explanations. No records of any kind. 17 civilizations investigated Earth, and not one of them produced a single document explaining their decision to withdraw. There is only the silence, Valeth. 17 silences where explanations should be. 17 blank spaces in the record where somebody should have written something down, and instead chose to walk away and never speak of it again. The weight of that settled on me like a physical thing. I understood what Dreth was telling me, without him needing to say it. Those civilizations had not failed to file reports. They had chosen not to. Whatever they found when they investigated Earth, it was something they did not want to put into words, something they wanted to forget. We are the 18th, I said. You are the 18th to investigate. You are the first to attack. Before I could respond, the bombardment alarm sounded through the ship. A deep, resonant tone that meant every weapon on every ship in the fleet was about to fire simultaneously. Mail had given the order. I ran for the bridge. I did not make it in time. 200 ships opened fire on Earth. Every primary battery, every secondary cannon, every missile tube and energy projector in the fleet unleashed its payload in a single coordinated salvo. The combined firepower could have shattered a moon. It descended toward the blue planet in a curtain of light so bright that the viewport filters engaged automatically to protect the bridge crew's vision. The curtain of light hit Earth's atmosphere, and the atmosphere hit back. I reached the bridge just in time to see it happen on the main display. The beams did not stop this time. They bent. Every beam, every missile, every energy projectile curved in the upper atmosphere, as though caught by an invisible hand and redirected upward. Our own weapons fire arced back toward the fleet, like a wave breaking against a cliff and washing back over the shore. Ships that had fired the heaviest salvos were struck by their own reflected energy. The heavy cruiser Dominion of Ash took its own main battery blast directly amidships and broke apart in a blossom of fire and metal. The battle carrier Wrath of Empire lost its entire forward section, the severed hull spinning away into the dark trailing debris and bodies. Escort frigates, destroyers, and support vessels burst like overripe fruit as their own weapons found them with the precision of a return address on a letter. I counted 14 ships destroyed in the first 3 seconds. By the end of the reflected barrage, 31 vessels were gone or dying. The tactical display was a constellation of red markers, each one representing hundreds of crew members who would never go home. And then Earth responded. It was not the single pinprick of light this time. This time, the planet's surface lit up like a festival night. Thousands of points of light appeared simultaneously across every continent, every ocean, scattered in patterns that covered the globe in a web of brilliance. They pulsed once in unison, a single coordinated heartbeat of light, and then they launched. I watched them rise through the atmosphere on my tactical display. Thousands of objects, climbing in perfect coordinated waves, accelerating at rates that my sensors could barely track. They were not missiles. Missiles follow predictable trajectories. These things changed course constantly, weaving through the debris field of our destroyed ships, adjusting their paths in real time with a fluidity that looked almost organic. They were not energy weapons either. Energy weapons travel in straight lines. These things curved. They swooped. They made decisions. My scanner identified them just before they reached the fleet. Each one was an autonomous kill vehicle, a self-guided, self-directing weapon platform, roughly the size of a Draven escape pod, traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. Each one was independently intelligent, capable of selecting its own targets, calculating its own attack vectors, and coordinating with every other kill vehicle in the swarm, without any detectable communication between them. They moved in patterns that shifted and adapted in real time, like a living organism responding to its environment. There were thousands of them, and they were choosing their targets. I watched them hit the fleet like a swarm of predatory insects descending on a wounded animal. They did not strike randomly. They prioritized. The first wave targeted ships with active weapons systems, punching through hulls with kinetic force that no armor could withstand. The second wave went for engines, crippling ships that were trying to flee. The third wave split into smaller groups that hunted specific subsystems, targeting reactor assemblies and ammunition stores with surgical precision that should have been impossible for autonomous weapons operating without a central command. The tactical display turned into a cascade of red markers as ship after ship went dark. The fleet that had conquered 900 worlds was being dismantled by a planet that was not supposed to have space travel. Grand Tactician Mail stood on the command deck and watched his empire's finest fleet die around him, and for the first time since I had known him, he had nothing to say. The throne of Ashavar ran. There is no other word for it. The flagship of the Draven Empire, the most powerful warship in the fleet, turned its engines to maximum burn and fled from a planet that our intelligence reports had classified as a soft target. We were not alone in running. Every surviving ship in the fleet that still had functional engines was doing the same thing. The organized formation that had entered the Sol system with such confidence had dissolved into a scattered, panicking mob of damaged vessels, all trying to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the blue world that had just torn our invasion force apart. But the kill vehicles were not finished. That was the part I had not anticipated. In every battle I had studied, in every conquest the Empire had ever undertaken, the enemy's weapons were finite. You endured the initial barrage, you absorbed the losses, and then you counterattack during the reload. It was the fundamental rhythm of warfare as the Draven understood it. Strike, absorb, counter. Every civilization we had ever fought operated on the same principle. The humans did not reload. Their kill vehicles did not expend themselves on impact and disappear. They struck, and then they came back. I watched on my display as individual kill vehicles that had already punched through the hull of one ship, looped around in tight, impossible arcs, recalculated their trajectories, and selected new targets. They were not ammunition. They were hunters, tireless, patient, relentless hunters that did not exhaust themselves and did not give up. And they were intelligent hunters at that. I could see patterns forming on the tactical display as the kill vehicles organized themselves into coordinated groups, cutting off escape vectors, herding damaged ships into clusters where they could be engaged more efficiently. Some of them were hanging back, patrolling the space between the fleet and the outer system, forming a net that would catch any ship trying to slip away along an unexpected trajectory. Others were moving in wide, sweeping arcs that covered the flanks, ensuring that no vessel could break free from the engagement zone without being tracked and pursued. They were not just fighting us, they were managing us. The way a shepherd manages a flock, the way a predator manages prey that does not yet understand it, has already been caught. Of the 200 ships that had entered the Sol system, fewer than 60 remained operational. The rest were destroyed, disabled, or drifting without power. The void around Earth was filled with wreckage and bodies, and the fading heat signatures of ships that would never fly again. On the command deck, Grand Tactician Mail had retreated to his private chambers and sealed the door. I could hear him through the bulkhead, issuing orders on his personal channel. The orders were contradictory: attack, retreat, regroup, scatter. He was cycling through tactical options the way a drowning man cycles through strokes, trying everything and achieving nothing. His voice had taken on a quality I had never heard from him before. It was not the voice of a commander. It was the voice of a man watching his legacy collapse around him in real time. Some captains had stopped responding to him entirely. The fleet's command structure, built on rigid hierarchy and absolute obedience, was dissolving in real time. Individual ship commanders were making their own decisions, acting on survival instinct, rather than orders from a leader who had led them into a catastrophe. And then 3 ships did something extraordinary. The light cruiser Silver Dawn, the escort frigate Pale Wind, and the transport vessel Gentle Harbor all powered down their weapons simultaneously. They cut their engines. They opened every communication channel available to them and broadcast a single word on all frequencies, in every language in their databases: surrender. I watched on my display as the kill vehicles reacted. The swarm that had been closing on those 3 ships slowed, circled once in a wide, evaluating orbit, and then flowed past them without engaging. The kill vehicles moved around the surrendered vessels the way water moves around a stone in a stream, acknowledging their presence without touching them. Not a single kill vehicle so much as adjusted course toward the disarmed ships. They were dismissed from the engagement as completely as though they had become invisible. The humans were distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants, in real time. In the middle of a battle, they were evaluating the threat status of individual ships and choosing not to engage those that had disarmed. Thousands of autonomous weapons, each one operating independently, each one making its own targeting decisions, and every single one of them had arrived at the same conclusion at the same moment. The surrendered ships were not threats. The surrendered ships would not be harmed. I stared at my display for a long time. In 900 conquests, the Draven Empire had never once made that distinction. When we attacked everything: military targets, civilian targets, ships that fought, and ships that surrendered. It was all the same to us. You conquered a world by breaking it so completely that resistance became unthinkable. The humans could have done the same to us. They had the power. They had demonstrated that beyond any possible doubt. But they were choosing, in the heat of battle, with their planet under attack, to spare the ships that stopped fighting. I did not know what to do with that information. It did not fit into any framework I had been trained to understand. I made a decision that could have ended my career and possibly my life. I left my station, walked to the auxiliary communication bay on the port side of the ship, and powered up a secondary transmitter array that was used for backup communications during diplomatic missions. I opened a channel on the same frequency the humans had used for their transmissions, and broadcast a message in the clearest Draven I could manage. This is Tactical Liaison Officer Valith Soren, aboard the Draven flagship Throne of Ashavar. I am not speaking on behalf of my commander. I am speaking for myself. I am requesting dialogue. Then I sat in the auxiliary bay and waited. 20 minutes. 20 of the longest minutes of my life, spent sitting in a cold room, listening to the distant rumble of kill vehicles striking ships that had not yet surrendered. 20 minutes of watching the tactical feed on the bay's secondary monitor as red marker after red marker blinked out, each one a ship, each ship a crew, each crew a collection of people who had woken up that morning, expecting to conquer a world, and were now dying above it instead. 20 minutes of wondering whether the next impact would be the one that hit my ship, my deck, my compartment. The response came on the same frequency, a human voice, male, calm and conversational, with a tone that might have been appropriate for discussing the weather over a meal. He spoke Dravan as naturally as I did, without accent, without hesitation, with the kind of fluency that comes not from study, but from deep familiarity. Officer Soren, my name is Daniel Webb. I am a civilian consultant, not military. I have been authorized to speak with you. A civilian, The humans had sent a civilian to negotiate with an invading military fleet. I did not know whether to be insulted or terrified. I chose terrified. Consultant Webb, I want to discuss terms. Terms for what, Officer Soren? For ending this. A pause. Then, with what I could swear was a trace of warmth in his voice, he asked me a question that changed everything. How many of your crew are conscripts? I hesitated. It was not a question I had expected. Military capability, yes. Strategic objectives, certainly. Surrender conditions, absolutely. But he was asking about people, about the individuals aboard our ships who had not chosen to be there, about the farmers' children and the factory workers' sons, and the people who had been handed a uniform and told to board a ship whether they wanted to or not. Nearly 40%, I said. Across the fleet. Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear something in the background on his end. Not static. Voices. Multiple voices, speaking quietly in the human language. He was not alone. He was conferring with others. Officer Soren, we are going to give you a corridor. 12 degrees off your port stern. Any ship that enters the corridor with weapons powered down will not be engaged. You have 9 minutes. 9 minutes. Not a round number. Not an estimate. A precise calculation based on the current positions and velocities of the surviving ships, the patrol patterns of the kill vehicles, and the time it would take to clear a safe path through the debris field. The humans had done the math in real time, during a battle, while simultaneously managing thousands of autonomous weapons and conducting a diplomatic conversation through a civilian consultant who sounded like he was ordering lunch. I broadcast the offer to every surviving ship in the fleet on an open channel. I did not encrypt it. I did not route it through command. I spoke directly to every captain, every bridge officer, every crew member who could hear me. This is Officer Soren. The humans are offering a corridor. 12 degrees off port stern. Weapons down. Engines only. 9 minutes. Male's voice cut through the channel like a knife. He had heard my broadcast. He was screaming. Treason. Insubordination. Court-martial. Death. He ordered every ship to ignore my transmission and regroup for a counterattack. He invoked the Emperor's name. He invoked the honor of the Draven people. He invoked every oath and tradition and article of military law that had held the fleet together through 900 conquests. 14 captains ignored him. 14 ships powered down their weapons and turned toward the corridor. I watched them on my display, moving slowly, deliberately, broadcasting their compliance on all frequencies. The kill vehicles tracked them, circled once, and then pulled back. The gap opened. An actual navigable path through the field of wreckage and death, exactly where Daniel Webb had said it would be. Mail went silent for 10 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was different. The authority was gone. The confidence was gone. What remained was something raw and wounded and dangerous. He ordered the flagship to fire on the retreating ships, his own fleet, his own people. The weapons officer, a veteran named Commander Saith Pole, hesitated. His hands hovered over the firing controls. I could see him on the internal monitor, his face caught between duty and horror, the two pillars of his military career suddenly pulling in opposite directions. Mail drew his sidearm. He pointed it at Saith's head and repeated the order. And then the lights went out. Every system on the throne of Ashavar died simultaneously. Weapons, engines, life support, gravity, artificial illumination, everything. I floated in absolute darkness, weightless, surrounded by the sounds of objects drifting free of their mounts, and the startled shouts of crew members throughout the ship. The darkness was total, not the darkness of a dimmed room or a powered-down corridor, the darkness of a sealed tomb. In that darkness, a voice spoke through the ship's internal speakers. The speakers should have been offline. Everything was offline. But the voice came through clearly, calmly, with perfect audio quality, as though the laws of physics had agreed to make an exception for this one particular message. It was Daniel Webb. Your weapons officer made the right call. We are going to make sure you do not punish him for it. Emergency lighting flickered on, red and dim, casting long shadows across every surface. Gravity returned, weak and uneven, enough to keep people on the deck but not much more. Life support restarted with a wheeze and a hum. But the weapons system stayed dead. Engines stayed dead. Navigation stayed dead. The humans had reached inside our flagship, the most heavily shielded and hardened vessel in the Draven fleet, and turned off exactly what they wanted to turn off. They had left us alive. They had left us breathing. But they had taken away every tool we had for doing harm, the way you might take a sharp object from the hands of a child who does not understand why it is dangerous. I floated in the auxiliary bay, listening to the sound of male screaming orders that no system could execute, and I understood something that I suspected no Draven had ever understood before. We had not been fighting a primitive civilization. We had not been fighting a civilization at all. Not in any sense the Empire understood the word. We had been fighting something that was so far beyond us that it had spent the entire engagement holding back, measuring its response, making choices about who lived and who died with a precision that we could not begin to comprehend. The humans had not defeated us. Defeat implies a contest. There had been no contest. They had managed us. And now they were coming aboard. I stood in the airlock and watched the human shuttle approach through the narrow viewport. It was small, barely larger than one of our escape pods. Silver white, with clean lines and no visible weapons. It docked with our hull using a universal coupling adapter that fit our airlock perfectly, as though it had been designed for exactly this purpose, as though they had known the specifications of our airlocks before they ever laid eyes on our ship. 3 humans came aboard, 2 men and 1 woman. They were smaller than I expected. My species averages about 2 meters in height, with dense musculature and layered dermal plating. The humans were shorter, softer, and alarmingly fragile-looking. Their skin was thin enough that I could see the blood vessels beneath it. They wore no armor, no environmental suits, no visible weapons of any kind. They carried cases marked with symbols that I later learned indicated medical supplies. They had brought medicine, for us. The woman walked in front. She moved with the confident, unhurried stride of someone who was exactly where she intended to be, and had been expecting to be there for quite some time. Her hair was dark, cut short and practical. Her eyes were brown and steady, and when they found mine across the airlock, I saw no fear in them, no anger either. Something else, something patient and deliberate, the look of someone who has prepared for this moment and is determined to get it right. "Officer Soren," she said. My name. She already knew my name. "I am Commander Claire Ashworth, United Earth Defense Coordination. These are Specialist Philip Grant and Specialist Sophie Mercer. We have medical personnel standing by on our shuttle if your wounded need immediate attention." I stood there for a moment, trying to reconcile what was happening with everything I understood about how conquered species were supposed to behave. We had attacked their planet. We had tried to burn their world from orbit. We had fired every weapon we possessed at their home with the explicit intent of destroying it. And they had come aboard our crippled ship to offer us medical care. "Our medical bay is overwhelmed," I heard myself say. "We have casualties on multiple decks. Some compartments are still sealed, and we have not been able to reach the wounded inside." Ashworth nodded as though she had expected this. She touched a device on her wrist and spoke a few words in the human language. Within minutes, a second shuttle docked. Then a third. Human medical teams moved through our corridors, treating Draven wounded with equipment and medications that were specifically tailored to our biology. Our biology. They knew our biochemistry. They knew our wound treatment protocols. They knew which medications would help and which would harm. They knew our blood chemistry, our organ placement, our allergic reactions, our pain thresholds. They had prepared for this. Not in the hours since the battle, not in the days since we entered the system. They had prepared for this years ago, maybe decades ago, gathering information about our species through channels I could not imagine. I watched a human medic, a young man with steady hands and calm eyes, treat a Draven soldier with a compound wound that our own medical team had been unable to stabilize. The human worked quickly and expertly, applying a treatment gel that bonded with Draven tissue in a way that our own medicines could not match. The soldier looked up at the human who was saving his life with an expression of bewildered gratitude that I suspect neither of them fully understood. I led Commander Ashworth to a conference room on the upper decks. The room was intact but dark, lit only by emergency lighting that cast red shadows across the walls. We sat across from each other at a table designed for Draven officers, too large for her, the chairs too tall. She sat without complaint and folded her hands on the table surface, composed and professional, as though she had meetings in the crippled flagships of defeated invasion fleets on a regular basis. "You have questions," she said. "I have 1,000 questions. Start with the most important one." I thought about it. The weapons, the defense systems, the technology that had dismantled our fleet. Those were the questions a military officer should ask, but they were not the most important questions, not anymore. "How long have you known about us?" I asked. "Not about the fleet. About us, the Draven Empire, the wider galaxy, all of it." Ashworth considered this. 73 years, she said, give or take. 73 years, nearly 3/4 of a century. The Draven Empire had been conquering worlds and expanding its borders for 300 years, believing itself to be the dominant force in the galaxy. And for the last 73 of those years, a small blue planet on the edge of an unremarkable spiral arm had known about them, studied them, and said nothing. "We intercepted our first extrasolar communication signal 73 years ago," Ashworth continued. "It was not Draven. It was Thesari, a trade negotiation broadcast between two commercial outposts. We realized within months that we were not alone in the galaxy. Within 2 years, we had reverse-engineered the basic principles of faster-than-light communication from the signal structures we were intercepting. Within 5 years, we were listening to every major civilization within 100 light-years." "You could have announced yourselves," I said. "You could have joined the galactic community." "We could have," she agreed. "We chose not to. We studied the galactic community from a distance, Officer Soren, and we did not like what we saw." She said this without malice, without judgment even. The way a scholar might describe the results of an unpleasant experiment. "We saw an ecosystem of predators and prey, civilizations that expanded through conquest, and civilizations that survived by submission. We saw empires like yours, the Draven, that measured their worth by the number of worlds they had taken and the species they had subjugated. And we saw something else. We saw that the galaxy had a blind spot." "Earth," I said. "Earth, a planet broadcasting electromagnetic emissions for over a century, visible to anyone who cared to look, and classified by every passing survey as pre-threshold, primitive, harmless, not worth the trouble." She paused. "We realized that this classification was an asset. The galaxy expected pre-threshold worlds to be defenseless. That expectation could be weaponized." The word hit me like a physical blow. Weaponized. They had turned their apparent weakness into a strategic advantage. The lack of visible defenses, the primitive technology, the outdated satellites, the absence of a fleet. All of it was deliberate. A mask. A carefully constructed illusion maintained for decades, designed to present Earth as exactly what the galaxy expected a pre-threshold world to be. "You made yourselves look like prey," I said. "We made ourselves look like a test," Ashworth corrected gently. "We wanted to know which civilizations in our neighborhood would attack a defenseless world. We needed to identify the threats, so we became bait. Patient bait. Bait that watched and listened and cataloged every ship that passed through our system, and every decision those ships made. The implications cascaded through my mind like falling dominoes. Earth had not been caught off guard by our invasion. They had been waiting for it. Not waiting for us specifically, but waiting for whoever would come. Whoever would look at a planet full of people who appeared unable to defend themselves, and decide that those people deserved to be conquered. 17 civilizations had investigated Earth. 17 had looked at the apparently defenseless world, assessed the situation, and chosen to walk away. Some because they lacked the military capability, some because they had ethical objections to unprovoked conquest, some perhaps because they sensed something beneath the surface that warned them away. We were the 18th, and we were the first to pull the trigger. The others, I said. The 17 who came before us. What happened when they arrived? Nothing happened. They scanned us. They observed us. Some of them sent probes. A few made cautious contact with our outer system monitoring stations. All of them ultimately decided not to engage. We let them come and go freely. We watched them leave. And we noted their decision. And we were grateful for it. And if they had attacked? Ashworth looked at me steadily. Then we would have had this conversation with them instead. I thought about the Korvathi exploration vessel that had entered the Sol system 11 years ago and never returned. One of them did not leave, I said. The Korvathi ship. For the first time, something shifted in Ashworth's expression. Not guilt, not regret, something more like weight. The weight of a decision made long ago that still pressed against the shoulders of the people who had made it. The Korvathi vessel suffered a catastrophic reactor malfunction inside our system. Their containment failed. We responded to their distress signal and rescued the surviving crew members. All 12 survivors were returned to Korvathi space through intermediary channels, with full medical treatment and their personal effects intact. Returned through intermediary channels, I repeated, anonymously. The Korvathi government classified the incident and listed the vessel as lost. We did not correct them. It served both our interests for Earth to remain an unknown quantity. 12 survivors, returned home with medical treatment and their personal effects, by a species they did not know existed, through channels so discreet that their own government chose to cover it up rather than investigate further. That was not the action of a primitive world. That was the action of an intelligence agency with galactic reach and the sophistication to operate invisibly within the diplomatic structures of a spacefaring civilization. You have been operating in the galaxy for decades, I said. Not openly, but you have been there, listening, watching, intervening when necessary. Listening and watching, yes, intervening is a strong word. We prefer to describe it as maintaining awareness of our strategic environment. You intercepted our fleet before we dropped out of faster-than-light travel. How? Ashworth hesitated for the first time. I saw the calculation behind her eyes, the assessment of how much to reveal, how much to hold back, how much trust to extend to an officer of a fleet that had come to destroy her world. We monitor faster-than-light traffic throughout our region of the galaxy. We have done so for approximately 40 years. Your fleet's departure from Draven space was detected, and its trajectory calculated within hours of your launch. 40 years. They had been tracking faster-than-light travel across their region of the galaxy for 40 years. While the Draven Empire classified them as a primitive backwater incapable of basic spaceflight, the humans had been building detection networks that could spot a fleet launch from the other side of their stellar neighborhood. The satellites, I said, the ones in orbit around Earth, they are not communication platforms. Some of them are communication platforms, some of them are other things. What things? She smiled. It was the first time I had seen a human smile, and it was not what I expected. It was warm, almost gentle, entirely at odds with the reality of what her species had just done to the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. Officer Soren, I am going to be honest with you, because I think you have earned honesty today. Those satellites are the visible component of a defense network that extends throughout the Sol system and several light-years beyond it. The full capabilities of that network are not something I am authorized to discuss in detail. What I can tell you is that the demonstration you witnessed today represented a small fraction of our defensive capacity. We responded to your fleet with the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat, while preserving as many lives as possible. The minimum force necessary. They had destroyed over 100 warships, cracked open the most powerful fleet the Empire had ever assembled, and taken control of our flagship's internal systems from the surface of their planet. And that was the minimum. You could have destroyed us all, I said. It was not a question. Yes. Before we even fired a shot, before we entered orbit, before we dropped out of faster-than-light travel, you could have eliminated the entire fleet in the outer system, and we would never have known what hit us. Yes. Why did you not? And there it was. The question I had been circling since the moment the first warning arrived. Not how were they so powerful, not what technology did they possess, but why, given that power, had they chosen to let us live? Ashworth leaned forward slightly. Her eyes held mine, and I saw something in them that I had never expected to see from a species that had just defeated an empire. Sadness. Because we are not you, she said. We did not build these systems to destroy. We built them to protect. Our planet, our people, and our right to choose our own future without being conquered by civilizations that treat the galaxy as a buffet. We sent you a warning. We hoped the warning would be enough. She let that settle. Then she continued. Your fleet contains thousands of people who did not choose to be here. Conscripts, support staff, civilians attached to your logistics and academic corps. We know their names, Officer Soren, all of them. We have known them since before your fleet launched. We built files on every crew member aboard every ship. We know who volunteered and who was pressed into service. We know who has families waiting at home. We know which of your soldiers wrote farewell letters before departure and which ones expected to return. I felt cold. Not the cold of space or the cold of fear. The cold of being truly seen by something that had been watching you with perfect clarity while you stumbled through the dark, believing yourself invisible. Every kill vehicle that engaged your fleet was programmed with targeting constraints, she said. They prioritized weapons systems and propulsion. They avoided crew quarters and medical bays whenever structural integrity allowed it. They distinguished between ships that were actively fighting and ships that were trying to flee. The corridor we opened for your retreating vessels was not improvised. It was pre-planned. We had mapped 13 possible evacuation corridors before your fleet entered orbit, based on projected engagement scenarios and likely retreat vectors. Pre-planned. They had wargamed our retreat before we had even arrived. They had anticipated our failure, our panic, our desperation, and they had built escape routes for us in advance. We could have ended this before it began, Ashworth said. A single focused pulse to your fleet's navigation systems during faster-than-light transit would have scattered your ships across half the galaxy. Harmless, untraceable. Your grand tactician would have spent months regrouping and probably would have chosen a different target. But we chose not to do that. Why? Because we needed to know. We needed to see what the Draven Empire would do when faced with an apparently defenseless world. We needed to know if you were the kind of civilization that would attack the helpless. And now we know. The sadness in her eyes deepened. We always hope the warning will be enough. Mail was arrested 4 hours after the humans came aboard. Not by the humans, by his own officers. Commander Saeth Pole, the weapons officer who had hesitated to fire on our own retreating ships, led the detail that removed Mail from his chambers. Mail went quietly, which surprised me. I think the fight had gone out of him somewhere between the moment the lights went out and the moment the human medical teams started saving the lives of his wounded crew with medicines they should not have possessed and knowledge they should not have had. He would be returned to the Empire to face judgment. The humans made that clear. They had no interest in holding prisoners. They had no interest in territory, in tribute, in submission, in reparations, or in any of the spoils that the Draven Empire extracted from every world it conquered. They wanted one thing from us, and it was the one thing that the Draven Empire had never willingly given to anyone. They wanted the truth. Go home, Ashworth said to me, as the flagship's engines were brought back online by human engineering teams who seemed to understand our propulsion systems as well as we did. Perhaps better. Go home and tell them what happened here. Tell them what you found. Tell them everything. You want us to report our defeat. I want you to report the truth, not just to the Empire, to everyone. Open frequency. Officer Soren. Let every civilization in range hear what happens when you bring a fleet to Earth. The surviving ships gathered in the outer system. 34 had escaped through the corridor during the battle. The rest, including the flagship, were repaired enough to make the journey home. The humans provided navigational data for the fastest route back to Draven space, fuel supplements to ensure every ship could complete the voyage, and medical supplies sufficient to treat the wounded for the duration of the trip. They asked for nothing in return. They also brought food. Not military rations, not emergency provisions. Actual prepared meals, tailored to Draven biochemistry, seasoned with compounds that complemented our palate, packaged in containers that maintained proper temperature and freshness. They had cooked for us. The species that we had come to conquer had sent us home with packed meals for the road. As the fleet prepared to depart, I stood on the bridge of the throne of Ashavar and recorded my after-action report. I did not file it through military channels. I did not encrypt it. I did not route it through the chain of command that had led us into this disaster. I broadcast it on an open frequency, unencrypted, exactly the way the humans had sent their first warning. I spoke clearly and slowly, knowing that every civilization within transmission range would hear my words. Every intelligence service, every military command, every diplomatic corps in the galaxy would receive this transmission and know what had happened to the Draven Empire's conquest fleet. I described the warning and how we had ignored it. I described the silence that followed and the drones that vanished without a trace. I described the orbital strike that was stopped dead in the atmosphere and the single weapon that cracked a destroyer in half. I described the bombardment that was turned back on us and the autonomous kill vehicles that hunted our fleet with intelligence and precision that exceeded anything in our technological understanding. I described the corridor, the mercy, the medical teams, the food tailored to our biology, the engineering crews that repaired our ships so we could go home. I described Commander Claire Ashworth, sitting across from me in a darkened conference room, explaining without arrogance or malice that humanity had been watching the galaxy for 73 years and had chosen to look weak so they could identify the civilizations that would prey on weakness. I described the sadness in her eyes when she told me they always hoped the warning would be enough. And I ended my report with a recommendation that I knew would be heard by every listening ear in the galaxy. Do not go to Earth looking for a fight. They have been ready longer than we have been an empire. They would rather feed you than destroy you. But they are fully capable of both. I have seen what they can do when provoked, and I have seen what they choose to do when the fighting stops. I do not know which one frightens me more. The fleet limped out of the Sol system, trailing damage and debris, carrying the wounded and the dead, and the weight of a lesson that no Draven commander had ever had to learn before. We passed the outer planets in silence. No one spoke. The corridors were quiet. Even the engines seemed subdued, as though the ship itself understood that something fundamental had changed in the universe, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. As we crossed the boundary of the Sol system and prepared to engage faster-than-light travel, I looked at my long-range sensor display one final time. Earth was a small blue dot behind us, barely visible against the black. Its ring of satellites was still there, thousands of tiny points of light arranged in their quiet, patient orbits. But they had moved, not randomly, not as part of any orbital mechanic I could identify. They had shifted position while we were departing, rearranging themselves into a new configuration that my analysis software identified immediately. The satellites had formed an alignment that pointed directly along the trajectory of our retreating fleet, a line of attention, stretching from Earth to the edge of the system and beyond, aimed precisely at the path we were taking home. They were watching us. Not with hostility, not with triumph, with the patient, steady attention of a species that had watched the galaxy for 73 years and intended to watch it for 700 more. A species that had learned everything about us before we knew they existed. A species that had built weapons capable of ending civilizations and then chose to use them as sparingly as a surgeon uses a scalpel. A species that sent warnings before it sent weapons, and medical teams after the weapons were done, and packed lunches for the long trip home. I looked at that blue dot until it disappeared into the star field behind us, and I made a private addition to my report. Not broadcast, not for the Empire or the galaxy, just for myself, recorded in my personal log where no one would ever read it. I wrote 4 words. They were always watching. And then I turned my chair toward home and wondered, for the first time in my life, what kind of galaxy it might be if more civilizations chose to be the warning instead of the weapon. If more species looked at a defenseless world and decided that the measure of their strength was not what they could take, but what they chose not to. Behind us, silent and small and impossibly vast, Earth turned on its axis and waited for the next fleet that would not listen. The satellites held their positions, steady and patient and bright, watching us all the way home, watching everything, the way they always had, the way they always would.